It was once said to me, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 5 years ago, you're not growing fast enough.
A common insecurity that I hear from a lot of founders is that they don't have a co-founder yet, or they're unsure about their existing co-founder. Today, we're going to be speaking to Ben Tauber, though. He's an executive coach and an exited founder about this exact topic. Ben, welcome. It's great to have you here. And also a fun fact for our audience, by the way, Ben was my coach for a period of time and he's amazing.
Thank you, Eric. It's such an honor to be here with you and Hustle Fund and be back together.
Let's just jump right into it. You've been a founder and investor long before becoming a coach. What's your perspective on co-founders? Does it matter to have one?
Yes and no. There's conventional wisdom, right? Y Combinator often wants you to have a co-founder as a first-time founder. I think there's a few elements that drive what's behind that. And so what I would really encourage a first-time founder or someone who's looking to start a company is to look at what is the motivation behind that, right? So there are things like motivation itself, working with someone else. Does that keep you lit up and going? Focus is another one. Knowledge, is there something missing? You've got the sales side, they've got the technical side. Fundraising is another key one. Does the team you're putting together look attractive for funding? Network is another one, right? So there's a set of factors that are worth considering. What I see though with a lot of friends at our stage is that they'll often be solo founders and then hire a senior team. So it also depends on sort of resources and experience as well.
I think there's one more element here too that I would add, Ben, which is not being lonely. So I've been a solo founder before my first company for 9 years. And I gotta say, it was really, really tough feeling so isolated, feeling all this weight on my shoulders. Now that I'm in a company where I have two other fantastic co-founders, where we can sort of even out this weight, psychologically, it's so much easier for me to do this work. What about like the mental health aspects too? I mean, it does feel so lonely being a solo founder too.
Being a solo founder or an executive is very often a lonely job. Building the type of relationship where you can share what's really going on inside is just so important. So definitely you can get that from co-founders, but also having a network, right? Having friends who are also founders or people you can talk to that understand is just so important for your mental health and to, stay energized as you go through probably what will be one of the most intense journeys of your life.
In this episode, we're going to be talking in just a moment about how you find co-founders, how you select them. But I'm kind of curious about getting into your journey as well, because you were a founder before.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a bad co-founder dynamic? And what did that do, I think, for your company, your mental health, and I guess the vibes of your business?
Yeah. I mean, great question. My first company, and we did end up having an exit to Google, I would argue that I was the bad co-founder. And that's ultimately what led me on the journey to grow and develop. And that's really what's going on here as we found companies, is that we're putting ourselves on this exponential growth track. So some of the things that I was doing as a bad co-founder, high conflict, right? I was really focused on being right and on product truth, right? And I didn't understand the impact of my words on other people. I didn't understand the importance of emotional intelligence. I thought emotion had no place in a business environment. That's sort of what we're taught. There was a lot that I was doing that was really hampering progress in the company, but also really damaging the relationships between me and two of my closest friends, who were my co-founders.
This is weird to hear, because I've worked with you as my coach and you're one of the highest EQ people that I know on this planet. To hear that that's something that was lacking in your experiences when you're running your first company is kind of nuts, but also gives me a little hope here too, because it seems like if you have the agency to make some changes with the right kind of help, it's certainly possible, even in those kinds of situations of starting in a slightly more toxic starting point, you can actually end in a better place. At least, have you found that to be true with some of your clients?
Absolutely. And it was once said to me, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 5 years ago, you're not growing fast enough. So that's really what we're signing up for, right? And also the role of a founder changes so radically every 6 months, right? Pre-product market fit versus post-product market fit, and then growing a product versus growing a company, right? You're just on this exponential curve, right? And so you've got to be willing to learn. And then my other favorite little saying is that we teach what we need to learn. So for me, EQ was a total blind spot up until I was maybe, 26 or 27 and ended up with my first coach.
I want to get into some tactics here. Let's say that I am a new founder. I am convinced that I could really benefit from having a co-founder with some of those complementary skill sets that you cited earlier. How would you coach me on the best way to find and select a co-founder? What does that dating process actually look like?
I would focus our attention on the non-obvious things, right? So the obvious things are things like skills, right? And there's plenty of stuff out there around how to evaluate someone, do they have the chops around the role and the responsibilities and all of that. I would want to get you really clear on what is the vision and mission of what you want to build, and what are the values that you personally hold that are going to help you achieve that, because values trump strategy every time. And so once you have that clarity, then you can build those values into your hiring process, right? And actually learn to look for those and see if someone demonstrates them or not.
Pause a second on those, like the values part of it too. A very common question I'm hearing from my co-founders, like, how do you actually test for those kinds of values? Using this marriage metaphor is actually pretty good, I think, for co-founders, given how long this relationship has to be. It's like 7 to 10 years before your company gets acquired by Google or IPOs or whatever at the bare minimum. But this dating process, is not like years long, oftentimes, when you try to go find that co-founder. So on values, like, what does that actually look like tactically to start to really feel comfort behind that?
It might be helpful to break down quickly, like, why are values important, and then how to actually test for them. I always thought of values as sort of like this afterthought, like, oh, like, we'll get this done, or it's like this poster that, motivational poster, and there's like a cat hanging from a string or something like this, like, we hang on tight or whatever it is. Values are how decisions get made when you're not in the room. So as the company scales from the 2 of you or the 3 of you into 1 dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, then decisions need to get made in the organization, and you're not there, right? And now the interesting thing is, it's hard to think forward that far, right? You're like, God, I just need to get clear on what my idea even is and see if I can raise some funding. And yet the values themselves need to be a true, authentic reflection of you as the CEO or you as the founder. Values are what you do, what you act on. They're not what you say. And so if you are incongruent with your values, everyone sees that immediately. And then those are not the true values of the organization, regardless of what you put up on the wall. So you actually spending some time to get clear on what are the 4, and I want to be really tight. I did a study probably 7 or 8 years ago where we interviewed 20 of the top SaaS CEOs, and all of them had 4 to 6 values at most. 6 was the maximum. So I highly recommend 4 super tight values, right? And then so let's get clear on what a value actually is, and then we'll back up into how to interview for them, right? So I like John Stewart's definition, which is a value is what you do when it's hard. If you don't do it when it's hard, then it's a hobby.
That's great.
So let's say you have a value around integrity, right? Or honesty or something like that. Then let's define, what are the actions? What are the things that someone does or that you do that help you be crystal clear that they hold that as a value? It's like, oh, even though there was going to be a loss of face, I tell the truth, right? Or even when, it was my fault, the server went down, I let everyone in the company know, and then I worked overtime to get it done, something like that. So the idea is, get clear on what those 4 things are that you think are true for you, that will have the highest leverage in creating the organization that can achieve your mission. And then start to write out the behaviors that you think will get there. And then from that, you can start to back into questions about people's past that would lead you to believe there's a consistency around their behavior that is emblematic of them having that value.
When you do backtrack and you have those questions, I really like this method, this approach. Is that largely through like reference checks, like talking to previous workmates? Like what's worked for you in the past?
I'm a big fan of some of the key questions out of the book. Who? Like, so for example, if you ask someone what their previous manager would say about you, they start getting honest pretty quickly. Reference checks are really, really good. And then the other thing is working together and navigating conflict. Everything comes out in conflict. And so I cannot tell you how important it is to have the hard conversations up front. Why is this person starting a company? What happens if it doesn't work out for them? What role do they want to play? Do they want to be CEO and you want to be CEO? Go try to fight that battle now. Do all the hard conversations up front if you can. And then the last thing is that people reveal themselves over time, and there's just no substitute for that. So I just couldn't recommend more spending some time actually working on meaningful things together and seeing how you ride some ups and downs.
Ben, is there anything else on your list of soft skills that you would seek or try to test for as part of this co-founder dating process too?
One of the most important things I would say is growth mindset. Carol Dweck, probably the most cited psychologist on the planet, is a professor over at Stanford, and she coined this term growth mindset as contrasted from fixed mindset. And so fixed mindset, she studied this in kids, right? Some people have this fixed mindset and they sort of believe that they and others are the way they are and their intelligence is fixed. Whereas growth mindset is this belief that you can learn and grow and increase your intelligence. People in a fixed mindset tend to believe that fault exists in everyone else. They're the way they are. They can't change. I can't change. Whereas growth mindset, there's this curiosity loop around how they are creating the situation that they're in. And so ideally, you as a founder have growth mindset and your co-founder has growth mindset, because then you can actually look at how you're making mistakes and learn from them and grow and iterate, right? I mean, I was a terrible manager and got to see some of the ways and some of my own patterns and then seek to improve that. And so I would be looking for that as one of the number one qualities in a co-founder.
This is one that I think is a very, very big criteria for our own hiring at Hustle Fund as well. And actually, some of the most obnoxious people I ever worked in my career were in a fixed mindset realm. You'd notice this in very small ways. You'd say like, what if we tried doing this? The response was almost always so reactionary. It's like, I tried it before, never works. They try to just end the conversation, it never works. It never works. I'm right. It never works. But the better kind of reaction I find with the growth mindset kind of colleagues was, I have tried this before, but maybe things have changed. Let me talk to like 15 other people that I know that are kind of in this realm and see what we can learn and experiment again. It also ties to EQ, I find, a little bit, right, Ben? Of just like those that have a little bit more of a humble disposition and are saying like, maybe things have changed. Maybe I'm not right anymore about this.
Absolutely. And I did a study with Carol on about 150 founders, maybe 7 years ago.
Wow.
Looking at growth mindset. And what we found was a strong correlation. It wasn't a causation study, but a correlation between growth mindset and more total funding and more rounds of funding in the founders that we looked at. So there's definitely a link there. And then I do think there is a correlation with EQ, although I had pretty low EQ when I started out. That can be taught, but is there that willingness to learn is going to be so big, especially as you start to lead a team. Can you be aware of your own emotional state and the emotional states of others? Because we are working with wetware, right? We're working with people that have feelings as much as we don't want them to have feelings, or at least me as an engineer didn't want to have feelings.
This conversation is starting to feel like we're talking about marriages and relationships here. And I want to talk about something that I think is consistent in both a co-founding relationship or any relationship is arguments. So you cited this before, which is a lot gets revealed in the course of conflict. What does a healthy argument actually look like between co-founders?
A healthy argument between co-founders would look something like that. And there's scripts for this. This is the type of thing where actually I spend a lot of time training founders, whether it's, around models like Kim Lone Scott's radical candor or conscious leadership, and they're clearing conversations or something else, right? But a typical script would be like, hey, Eric, I feel a disconnect with you. And because our relationship's really important, I'd like to clear something with you. Do you have a minute to chat right now? And they might not. And then you go, okay, when's a good time? And then you find a good time. This is important, right? Because if someone's in a bad mood, right? Like, is that the right time to clear? Probably not. And I don't want to go too into detail, but there are three things that are really, really important. One is separating out facts from story. This is probably like, if there's one takeaway, it's separating fact from story. What people will typically state as a fact is something like, Eric, you're always late to meetings. Now, this puts you immediately on the defensive. Now, if we unpack it, I'm sorry, I'm using you as the example. Are you okay with this?
I'm okay.
By the way, you're always on time to meetings. This would almost never happen.
Late on me.
So a fact is simply, what would a camera record? What would it see? What would it hear? So fact would be, hey, Eric, you were 7 minutes late to our meeting yesterday. That's where you've separated out the fact. Now the story, and this is the part that's really helpful, and you can even complete the phrase, the story that I make up, because it takes us out of the realm of debating what's true. The story that I make up is that you're late to meetings and that you don't value my time. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? But so the story that I make up, right? And separating that out creates space for me to take responsibility for my mind making up this story that I'm thinking is true. And therefore, now I get to talk about my emotions. I feel angry. I feel sad. I feel confused. And then, a story I make up is, you're my co-founder. You should value me. We should be on time to meetings so that we can be effective and productive. And then engage in active listening, right? So once I've shared everything I need to share, then you would just simply mirror back without any elaboration what you heard. So you go, hey, Ben, what I heard you say is that I was 7 minutes late to the meeting yesterday, and you felt, or you make up the story that I don't value you. You're feeling hurt and angry and sad. Is that right? And we just go back and forth, because the number one thing that happens is people are talking over each other. And when I'm speaking, you're trying to think about what your counter argument is going to be, because we're both trying to be right, as opposed to you just hearing me out. So getting through that piece, I say everything I need to say, you mirror it back with active listening, and doing that to completion. That alone is a huge win, because it allows you to feel compassionate from my perspective. And I'm sharing in a way where it's, by me saying I'm making up a story, you aren't made wrong. My story isn't true. It's just a story. But we don't have to debate whether or not you were 7 minutes late, right? Like the clock said 7 minutes late. And then you can get into what you want. Hey, Eric, I would like to make an agreement with you that we're on time to meetings. Is that okay? And then you can talk to that. But until you separate these things out, it gets really messy and takes a long time.
I tend to see a lot of founders who, at least in our business, tend to be more technically oriented, having a very hard time in actually running a conversation like this, because what I'm hearing from you is like very interesting nuances. Is a lot of this is also asking for permission to be very frank, and also just like isolating like how I'm feeling about like what's happening, as well as like what's factually happening too. I don't want to play too many stereotypes here, but like, do you find that like more technically oriented first-time founders actually like just take more time to understand how to run a conversation like that too?
Yes and no. I'm a computer scientist and engineer by training, and we teach what we need to learn, right? I didn't have EQ. I wasn't aware of any of this, and I grew up in a family where we didn't acknowledge our emotions. And so I like to believe that I was a robot that was totally logical and unemotional. And so there's a couple of things to that. One is, it turns out if the emotional center of the brain is damaged, you can have lunch with someone and they can be completely logical and explain to you the value of having soup for lunch or salad for lunch or the half and half. And they literally cannot make the decision about which of the three to get. It's impossible to make decisions without emotion. Even if you're making logical decisions or what you think are logical, it turns out what you think is the best decision is the one that has the most positive emotions attached to it for you. You just feel like happy at the idea of being right, for example. So we want to get clear on that. And then what I find for engineers is that building some of these really simple scripts that we do in our coaching, where it's paint by numbers, and you're like, oh, we can address emotions and all of these things in a very clear way that's very structured, just makes this easy, right? And so if both co-founders get trained, it's like we just run through the script and they go, oh my God, we just spent 15 minutes and resolved this thing that we'd been fighting about for 3 weeks, or we've been trying to ignore, or we yelled at each other or whatever. So it takes time, but it's just you follow the process and it works.
So Ben, I think you've done a really good job of providing some advice as well as some tactics around, how to avoid the pitfalls of selecting the wrong co-founder, or in the course of that relationship, doing things that might create antagonism with your co-founder. But I want to talk about nurture now. So if you already do have a co-founder, what are you advising to nurture that relationship?
There are a few things that are really, really important. One is just a simple rule: no surprises. And what I mean by that is that you get out your withholds. So often there are things that we're holding on to as co-founders. I can't tell you how many, and I love coaching teams, right? But how many co-founder dynamics I come into where both founders tell me out of the gate that they think they should fire their co-founder, right? And what that means is that there's this lost opportunity for growth. The nurture part is that we have the opportunity to support each other on this incredible rocket ship journey of growth. We can create feedback loops so that you as co-founder are telling me where I can grow, and I'm telling you where you can grow. And so being able to share that is so valuable. So creating a container where you have that trust and can share effectively is really important. And there's scripts and frameworks for that. I mentioned conscious leadership or radical candor, things like that. But related to that, the second thing is meet regularly. I mean, at the early stage, you're maybe working together all the time, but are you taking time to actually connect and work on the relationship itself and finding what works for you guys or gals, right? It might be beers, it might be a walk in nature together or kite surfing or something like that, but finding time where the two of you can connect at least on a weekly basis and talk about what's going on both at work and in your lives as a whole. So those would be my two big ones.
I love this. We've been having a great conversation around co-founders and strategies for selecting, nurturing, helping with conflict, getting through conflict. And I kind of want to wrap things up actually by talking about you, Ben Tauber. So, you were a really successful founder with a great exit in a past life, but your journey has been a little bit weird for me, right? Like, why not start another startup? You have the capacity to do so. You could build from that success instead of your focus today, which is on coaching. Tell us a little bit more about that.
For me, after I exited to Google, I went on a search to really think about what my purpose was. There's a longer story about some of the ways that I was disillusioned. There's this sort of this belief, right, that it's like we're going to grow this company and we're going to have this exit or we're going to IPO or whatever it is. And then we're going to feel whole and we're going to be happy and all that sort of stuff. Sure, there was money and other things, but nothing really changed inside. Right. And so I got to thinking about what really lit me up, what was my gift to give and my purpose. Right. And so what came through for me was this idea of realizing individual and collective human potential. And what that means is I love being at the forefront of what's possible and making the impossible possible and going beyond. And so I've curated those pioneers who are on the forefronts over time. And I love bringing that back to the founders that really want to make an impact on humanity in a positive way. And then that feels like my gift is being that catalyst.
So what kinds of platforms and programs are you working with now? And what kinds of clients in general are you seeking to work with?
So 10 years ago, I started a coaching firm called Velocity Group. And now Velocity is one of the top firms in Silicon Valley and New York. And my friends continue to lead that. But the belief that I had was there's sort of this full stack approach, right? There's really clear leadership, management, psychological techniques and processes that we can use to be really effective and laser focused. And the idea with Velocity was, could we bring the best of breed coaches into early stage startups? And now the chains have moved towards my sort of deeper belief that this full stack that also, along with best of breed, includes sort of, body and mind, meditation stuff, is actually a 1 + 1 + 1 = 10 solution. It certainly has been for me. And so it's not even out yet, but I'm working on a set of programs around a new company called Rewire. And so I've been prototyping this for a year and a half under my own personal coaching brand, but it's where we put a whole team around you to give you the best of the best across every dimension.
So you heard it here first, folks. The unofficial launch of the Rewire platform right here on Uncapped Notes. Ben, I really appreciate that you revealed that to our audience here today. I got to say this to you. I cited this before at the top of the episode. I've worked with Ben as my coach, and there's a saying that I love, which is small hinges swing wide doors. And while I don't want to call Ben necessarily a small hinge, because I think actually he's been a really big influence in my life. I mean, Ben, I got to say, I want to thank you on the record that just working with you, even in a brief period of time already, has given me so many good mental models of what good looks like in terms of someone that's so intentional in how you spend your time, how you like to balance really exciting work and ambition with family and just growth too. And it's been such a pleasure to work with you. And I do hope that people will check out benjamintauber.com. We'll flash the website and put the URL in the show notes as well. So you can actually track this Rewire program, but also maybe even have a chance to reach out to Ben directly too. Ben, I just wanted to give you that big thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's such an honor to have the opportunity to support you and be here with you on your YouTube channel today. Thank you.
A huge thank you to our special guest today on Uncapped Notes, Ben Tauber. I highly recommend that you check out benjamintauber.com to learn about his programs and services. He's been an amazing coach to so many tech leaders and just intentional people trying to make some big changes in their lives. And if you like today's content, I highly recommend that you sign up for The Founder Playbook, which is our newsletter that serves especially first-time founders on topics related to startups and venture capital. We'll flash the information on how you can sign up in the next screen. Thanks so much.